Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, we are jumping straight into, well, maybe one of the biggest historical puzzles out there. The Needham paradox. I mean, just think about it for a second. China. For, like, centuries, they were way ahead in inventing stuff that genuinely changed the world. We're talking the compass, paper, printing, long before Gutenberg, mind you, and gunpowder. These weren't small things, right? These are, like, foundational technologies, the pillars that shaped, well, everything.
Okay.
So here's the massive question Joseph Needham asked. With all that practical genius, all that incredible tech know-how, why didn't they kick off the scientific revolution? You know, the whole systematic, mathematical, experimental science thing that really took off with Galileo and Newton in Europe.
It's such a core question because, it tackles why a civilization that led technologically for so long eventually didn't continue on that specific path. And for ages, the Needham paradox, it sort of felt like the final word explaining this divergence, But what we're doing in this deep dive is shifting gears a bit. We're moving from that historical why not then question to the really urgent why now question. Because things look very different today. We're digging into the sources that map out this huge civilizational change. How those old constraints got, forcefully dismantled, paving the way for modern science to not just arrive in China, but to really explode there now.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that historical side first, just to really get the weight of this paradox. What were those deep forces Needham pointed to? The things holding back that leap from brilliant tech to, like, universal laws of physics?
Well, Needham was brilliant because he didn't just look at the inventions. He looked at the whole system. The philosophy of politics, the whole fabric of the civilization. And he found basically three big limiting factors woven right in. Not necessarily flaws, just different priorities.
Yeah.
So the first one he flagged was political or structural. It was the imperial bureaucracy. Now, this system was amazing for stability, for running a huge empire, but its absolute priority was order, maintaining the status quo. And, the kind of thinking that drives science, saying, hey, your whole model of the cosmos is wrong, let's tear it down. That's inherently disruptive, isn't it? It's fundamentally challenging.
Huh. So you're saying a really effective government system, just by its nature, kind of worked against the radical curiosity you need for, say, fundamental physics?
In a way, yeah, exactly. Scientific breakthroughs often mean upsetting the apple cart. And a bureaucracy built on stability, merit through classical learning. It tended to see that kind of unpredictable, maybe not immediately useful research as, maybe a threat, or at least not worth huge state backing. Practical tech, sure, that helped run things. Abstract laws of nature, different story.
That makes a lot of sense. Practical versus foundational.
Then the second barrier was philosophical, and this really stems from Confucianism being so central. The main intellectual game in town, you could say, was focused on society. Harmony, ethics, good government, human relationships. The Tao of living together.
Right, how to order society.
Exactly. So the sharpest minds were really directed inward toward understanding social dynamics rather than outward towards, relentlessly poking and prodding the external mechanical workings of nature itself.
Yeah, I can see that. If your biggest goal is figuring out how millions of people can live together peacefully, you're probably not spending your nights timing things rolling down ramps. Different priorities, completely.
And that connects to the third point, which is maybe a bit more subtle. It's about the conceptual toolkit they had. Specifically, the absence of this idea of a single divine lawgiver.
Ah, right, the divine lawgiver. We've had that phrase. Why was that idea so critical for Western science taking off? Can you break that down?
Sure. So in the West, largely coming out of the Abrahamic traditions, there was this strong idea God created the universe. And crucially, this God was rational. Therefore, the universe itself must be rational, ordered. It must follow consistent, fixed laws. And because God was rational, humans seen as created in God's image could use their own rationality, especially mathematics, the ultimate rational language, to figure out those laws, to decode God's creation.
So, a direct link. God, rational, universe, math as the key.
Precisely. That belief provided this deep philosophical justification, almost a mandate, for figures like Kepler, Newton, to search for mathematical laws governing nature. It connected theology, reason, and math in a really powerful way. Needham argued that Chinese cosmology, while incredibly deep and complex in its own right, just didn't have that specific concept. Nature was often seen more as this organic, interconnected, constantly flowing whole, not so much a machine built by a divine architect following fixed blueprints.
As clockwork, more river.
Kind of, yeah. So the drive to find universal, mathematically perfect laws wasn't quite as central or maybe as intuitive within that worldview.
Okay, wow. So you put those three together. The stability-first bureaucracy, the inward-looking social philosophy, and then no divine code to crack with math. You can really see why the paths diverged. And yeah, for a long time that Needham question felt like, well, that's just how it was, a historical fact.
It really did feel like an explanation for something permanent. But, and this is the crucial turn in the sources we looked at, those limits, however deep they seemed, they weren't actually set in stone forever.
Right, this is where it gets wild. The 20th century, the sources call it the Great Unshackling. I mean, if those factors were so deeply baked into the civilization, how on earth do you just remove them?
Well, the sources are clear. Those old systems Needham talked about, they were basically dismantled, swept away by huge transformative events in the 20th century, often violent, incredibly profound changes that essentially hit the reset button on centuries of tradition.
A complete reset.
And critically, think about the why. The sources really stress the motivation here. It wasn't some academic debate. China saw very clearly the link between Western power, global dominance, really, and its mastery of science and technology.
It felt vulnerable.
Exactly. Humbled, but also galvanized. That realization, that vulnerability created this powerful national drive to change everything, to catch up, to adopt the engine that seemed to be driving the West.
So it wasn't just like borrowing some tech, it was more like, okay, we need the whole operating system that produces this kind of power. A forced learning, almost.
That's a good way to put it. And what we're seeing now is the result, decades later, of that fundamental decision. The sources emphasized this wasn't just drift. It was a conscious, huge act of national will, a strategic, full-scale embrace of modern science and technology, and absolutely essential for survival and strength.
The shift in focus must have been incredible.
Oh, absolutely. And you see it so clearly in the people, in the human capital. Think about the contrast. Historically, the elite, the Mandarin class who ran the empire, their entire focus was mastering classical literature, philosophy, history.
The Confucian classics.
Right. Now, that same level of intense intellectual ambition, that drive for excellence, it's been completely redirected. Today, the pinnacle is often seen as mastering engineering, computer science, physics, biotech, that ancient focus on social harmony through classics. It's been channeled powerfully into achieving technological strength on the world stage. The whole intellectual center of gravity just shifted.
So the whole narrative flips, doesn't it? It goes from a passive, why didn't it happen here, to this very active, organized, strategic mission. How do we master this, catch up, maybe even lead on our own terms?
Exactly. And what's so interesting now is that China is effectively moving beyond the original paradox.
Yeah.
They've taken the Western scientific model, which, remember, grew out of a very different historical soil, and they're scaling it up using their own system strengths. The old constraints are gone, but that capacity for large-scale state action, that remains, just pointed in a new direction.
Which brings us right up to today, the why now. What are the key factors enabling this incredible scientific velocity we're seeing?
Well, the sources point to a few key things driving it now. First, just sheer investment. Massive, sustained, long-term investment. You've got a state system that can pour enormous resources into basic research, into infrastructure, huge science projects.
Things that span decades, not just election cycles.
Exactly, without needing to justify it based on next quarter's profits or the next vote. That long view is a huge advantage for fundamental science.
Hard to overstate that, yeah. What else?
Second, there's a cultural element. There's now a really strong emphasis on collective scientific effort. It's framed as a national priority, something vital for the country's future. So, pursuing science, engineering, it carries a lot of prestige. It's seen as contributing to this larger goal.
So it's not just a job, it's a mission, kind of.
In some ways, yeah. And the third factor is just scale. The sheer number of people, the human capital now being educated in and directed toward science and technology is just staggering.
Millions of engineers and scientists graduating every year.
Right. You combine that scale with rigorous education and that focused state investment. The output in terms of research, innovation, PhDs, it becomes this incredible force multiplier, something the world hasn't really seen on this scale before.
So if you pull back and look at this whole arc, from ancient innovation to the paradox to now, what's the big takeaway? The sources seem to frame it as this massive story of civilizational learning. It's almost like proof that the scientific method itself isn't culturally bound, maybe. That once you prepare the ground, once you remove those specific political or philosophical roadblocks Needham identified, it can flourish anywhere.
That seems to be the core insight, yeah. Needham showed why the ground wasn't fertile then. But the modern story shows that the ground can be prepared. It's reversible. So it's less about some innate scientific ability belonging to one culture or another, and much more about getting the conditions right, removing the barriers. Once that happens, science seems to be pretty universal.
So the world isn't asking why not China anymore.
Not at all. Now everyone's watching. What happens when this ancient civilization, unburdened by those specific historical constraints, picks up the scientific toolkit with this level of focus and coordination? What will they build?
Yeah, that shift from why not then to why now is genuinely one of the biggest stories of our time. Which, leads us perfectly to a final thought, something for you, the listener, to really chew on. If those old limits were philosophical, structural, about stability versus disruption, what might be the new limits or maybe accelerators in this current phase? What happens when science is scaled up with this kind of speed, backed by immense state will focused on national goals? Does the nature of discovery itself change when it's driven more by planned coordination than by, say, independent, sometimes messy, disruptive individuals? That's something to really think about.